everybody, it's Vertical Sandwich. Welcome back to Book Reviews. Today we're doing Ancillary Mercy, the third book in the Ancillary Trilogy by Ann Leckie. And I will say this, so as a conclusion for this book, it was very interesting because the first book is all about shared consciousness and hive minds. And the second book is kind of this weird puzzle mystery, kind of like whodunit. And then the third book is all about the beginning of an AI revolution. And you just go I didn't, that's the thing you did there. I really like this trilogy. And the reason I like this trilogy is because Ann Leckie is very comfortable being bizarre. And the passage I'm going to read from this is pretty great because one of the characters that's introduced into this in the second book is a translator from an alien race that doesn't understand people, so they've through experimentation on living people, they've created kind of people, but they're not people. And the dialogue from them is amazing. It's just amazing because they just say things that you just go those things aren't things. They're not. Those are not the kind of thoughts people put together. And so people are treating them they have names, but they don't know really who they are. One of them shows up and is I'm Translator Dalik. And the other one's no, Translator Dalik was already here, you must be blah blah blah. They're oh, I'm not Dalik. And they're no, and they're oh good, I didn't like her anyway. I'm so glad I'm not her. And it's but you were never her. And that said so worth it. And Ann Leckie, that's the thing, is that's one of the wonderful things about what Ann Leckie did in her science fiction trilogy was kind of went for the fun, right? To go science fiction doesn't need to be hammered into kind of these, where do we get comic relief in this really serious story of intrigue? How about that person who, is actually an alien that looks like a person, kind of. They're a person construction from an alien. Yeah. So that's gonna show up in this little passage. Ancillary fast. Sphene rose from the bench it had been sitting on and moved towards 5. I put myself between them, grabbed Sphene's forearm before it could strike either of us. Sphene froze, its arm in my grip, blinked, face expressionless. Manet, is it? I had moved faster than any Radshi human could. There was no escaping the obvious conclusion. I was not human. My name made the next incorrect conclusion just as obvious. It is not, I said, quietly and in note, because I wasn't sure where the magistrate was just now. I am the last remaining fragment of the troop carrier Justice of Torn. It was Anander Manet who destroyed me. I switched back to Radshi. Step back, cousin. It was motionless for an instant, and then almost imperceptibly it shifted its weight back, away from me. I opened my hand, and it lowered its arm. I turned my head at a splash from across the courtyard. Translator Ziat stood upright now, one leg still in the water, one arm soaked and dripping. A small orange fish wriggled desperately in her grip. As I watched, she tilted her head back and held the fish over her mouth. Translator! I said loud and sharp, and she turned her head towards me. Please don't do that. Please put the fish back in the water. But it's a fish. Her expression was frankly perplexed. Aren't fish for eating? The district magistrate stood at the top of the steps, stood at the top of the steps into the courtyard, staring at the translator, quite possibly afraid to say anything. Some fish are for eating. He went over to where the translator stood half in and half out of the water. Not this one. I cupped my hands, held them out, with a little scowl that reminded me of Dalik. Translator Ziat dropped the fish into my outstretched hands, and I quickly tipped it into the basin before it could flip out onto the ground. These fish are for looking at. Are you not supposed to look at the fish you eat? Translator Ziat asked. And how do you tell the difference? Which is just Alice in Wonderland. This is just Alice in Wonderland. Nobody can tell me any different. Nobody can tell me Ann Leckie didn't go, you know what this sci-fi trilogy needs? An Alice in Wonderland character. Because that's what that is. It's Humpty Dumpty. It just is. And I love that. I love that. I love that that's in the middle of this, where like this broken AI is talking to another human kind of broken AI and living on a ship that's like an AI that's bereft of like human hive mind companions, and it really bothers them all. So, for a moment, things seem to be under control for Breck, the soldier who used to be a warship. Then a search of Antioch Station slums turn up someone who shouldn't exist, and a messenger from the mysterious Presger Empire arrives, as does Breck's old enemy, the divided, heavily armed, and possibly insane Anander Minai, ruler of an empire at war with itself. Breck refuses to flee with her ship and crew because that would leave the people of Athoek in terrible danger. The odds aren't good, but that's never stopped her before. So yeah, she's like she's kind of supposed to be this action hero. One of the things that's really good though about this is, aside from like the translators who are obvious homages to the work of Lewis Carroll, and kind of is one of the things is kind of the social society and relationships and like a caste system that she made up for this empire, with like these old houses people belong to, and how people would kind of there would be kind of these sexual relationship contracts that then could increase prestige, like offering clientage to people. And then the idea of, but like that's not everything, that like actually like that's like a business relationship, but then like sex for pleasure is a thing, and seeing people without gloves is kind of unnerving and obscene and like very strange. So like very, but believable, but wonderfully believable. And then there's this entire culture of like kind of the tea trade, and how like, and these are things that have obvious historical precedents, right? That like we've had gigantic empires where tea was super important, like there are entire world events based around tea, and that's a thing. Like that's just a thing. So like Ann Leckie is not an idiot throwing anything at the wall to see if it sticks. Like Ann Leckie is working very carefully to produce a believable world with strange and yet compelling characters. And she just knocks it out of the park. Just knocks it out of the park. She's like, I'm going to write a drug addict. And you're like, man, you wrote an amazing drug addict. And then she's like, I'm going to write like a cyber soldier who used to be part of a hive mind and now isn't. And you're like, man, you really made me believe that person used to be 1,000 people. And then she's like, I'm going to write a ship that's lonely. And you're like, that ship seems really lonely. You're like, oh, so good. And then kind of how, one of the things that's really interesting is like, first off, the idea about whether or not AIs can be happy, like, or unhappy, and how they would react to such a thing. Now, like, that's one of the kind of themes of what she's writing, and how these AIs can feel, and that people can't understand that. Nobody thinks like, oh, I wonder how my computer feels. Like, and that's one of her issues, because she knows that the computer actually has like opinions and judgments and a semblance of, you know, what we would think of as emotions. Whether or not they actually have emotions, I don't really know. Like, I don't really think that's the point, right? And then, like, it's very, like, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but, like, Ann Leckie really just wanted to explore a lot of very interesting ideas. Right? Like, the ideas of class system and slavery, and then the ideas of colonization, the kind of dystopic ideas about like, assimilating people in a very mechanical way. But then the kind of things that like, the idea that the things that you own end up owning you, right? So like, yeah, all the people who were ancillaries on Justice of Torrens were people who were essentially captured and medically forced to be part of a battleship. But once they're integrated as a whole, they function as an entity. And so once one of them is removed, that person understands that what was done to them is theoretically an injustice, but their entire life, like their entire personality has been stripped away from them, and they miss it. Like they feel incomplete without, and what was done to them is not is not a kindness. But then what is done to them after, it seems like a graver injustice to them. It's really heavy stuff to think about on top of kind of this not lighthearted, this kind of well-structured, really put together trilogy of books. And my hat's off to Ann Leckie for that. Like, are the second and third books as good as the first? No. No, the first book is a revelation because it's so new and it's so fresh. But the second and third books are decent reads. Like, I don't regret that I read them. I liked them. I liked the characters, and I liked that there was a resolution at the end. And the resolution was fine. It was fine. It was fine. It wasn't anything, grandiose or philosophically mind-shattering or anything like that. It was things. Stuff happened, and then the story was over. But like I said, I think that the whole thing together makes up this really it's a creative feat to write a good trilogy that's solid from beginning to end. Like, I liked that a lot, and I really liked the Ancillary trilogy. So that actually concludes the list of Hugo Award winners, because that is the one that the Ancillary Justice is the one that I missed, and therefore, when we come back, we will not be doing, because I'm recording this today and I haven't read A Memory Called Empire yet. I'm about 60 pages in. So when we come back, I have these. I'll see you for that. Bye, everybody.